That the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Madam President, we face as a nation some of the most difficult circumstances that this country has faced since the Great Depression. Two of the major issues that we're facing is the collapse of the middle class, and simultaneously, while poverty increases and the middle class in this country disappears, we also find ourselves with a $14 trillion national debt and a $1.6 trillion deficit. And at this momentous moment in American history, the question arises as to how we, in fact, will deal with the deficit. Will we deal with it in a way that is fair and just, or will we, at a time when the gap between the very, very wealthy and everybody else is growing wider, will we, in fact, try to balance the budget on the backs of the middle class, on the backs of the poor, on the backs of the elderly, the sick, the children? That is the question that we have got to address right now. Yes, the deficit is a serious problem. Yes, we have got to go forward in deficit reduction, but no, in the midst of a major recession, it is morally wrong and economically bad policy to balance the budget on the backs of those people who are already hurting. And Madam President, I find it interesting that some of the loudest voices who come before us every day talking about the serious problem of the deficit are precisely those people who have voted time after time after time to raise the deficit, raise the national debt, and now they come forward and say we have got to cut programs for the elderly, the poor, the children in order to balance the budget. Now, I suppose it turns out that I and a few others are the real deficit hawks here in the Senate. When it came to the war in Iraq, which will end up costing us some $3 trillion, I didn't hear a whole lot of discussion about how that war was going to be paid for. I voted against that war. When it came to giving huge tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country, I didn't hear my Republican friends say, oh, gee, we can't do that because it's going to drive up the deficit. I voted against tax breaks for the wealthy. When it came to pass an unfunded $400 billion Medicare Part D prescription drug program written by the insurance companies and the drug companies, didn't hear my Republican friends say about how our kids and grandchildren are going to have to pay for that. I voted against that. And Madam President, you will recall that after the crooks on Wall Street drove this nation into a recession and they needed a bailout from the American people, I didn't hear too many of my friends who voted for that bailout say, oh, we can't do that, it's unpaid for, it's going to drive up the deficit and the national debt. I didn't hear that. But now suddenly we have people who have great concerns about the national debt and the deficit, and they intend to balance that budget on the backs of working people, the elderly, the sick, the poor, the children. And among other things, which is incomprehensible to me, at a time when approximately 16% of our people today are truly unemployed, way above the official levels, official numbers, because the official numbers do not include those people who have given up looking for work, those people who are working part-time when they want to work full-time. The Republicans come up with a deficit reduction package which will cost us some 700,000 jobs. Now, I don't know how or why in the middle of a severe recession, when unemployment is so high, you would come up with a proposal that costs 700,000 jobs. Madam President, you well know that we do an abysmal job in this country. In terms of taking care of our children, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. We have a totally inadequate early childhood education program in this country. Head Start, to the degree that it is funded adequately, does a good job. But in the midst of the crisis in early childhood education and child care, the Republican proposal would cut Head Start. Head Start, one of the most important programs in America, giving low-income kids a chance to maybe get into school in the first grade and kindergarten on par with the other kids. They want to cut that program by 20% from fiscal year 2010, depriving over 200,000 little kids the opportunity not only to receive early childhood education, but health care benefits, nutrition benefits from this important program. Madam President, I work very hard to expand community health centers in America because maybe it is a bad idea that 45,000 Americans are going to die this year because they don't get to a doctor. Pick up the papers all over America. Tens and tens of thousands of people are going to be thrown off of Medicaid. What do you do if you don't have health insurance and you're 40 or 50 years of age and you get sick? What do you do? And yet the Republican proposal would cut community health centers by $1.3 billion, denying 11 million patients access to quality primary health care. In the midst of a major health care crisis, when millions of people are uninsured, 50 million people uninsured, people being thrown off of Medicaid, you don't shut down community health centers and deny people access to health care. Madam President, in Vermont, and I'm sure in New York State, young people are finding it very, very difficult to afford college education. They're coming out of college deeply in debt. In some cases, they can't go to college. We are falling behind other countries in terms of the percentage of our young people graduating from college. And yet the Republican proposal would reduce by 17% the average Pell Grant, and 9.4 million low-income college students would lose some or all of their Pell Grants. At this moment in American history, where we're involved in an internationally global economy, with so much pressure from abroad, we've got to invest more in education, more in higher education, not less. Madam President, in the state of Vermont, the Community Services Block Grant Program provides vital service to low-income people who are in need of emergency food, emergency housing, emergency services. They do a great job. The Republican proposal would cut Community Services Block Grant by $405 million, which would harm 20 million low-income people, including millions of seniors. Lastly, there's a long list of these cuts which make no sense to me at all, but I wanted to mention a cut of $1.3 billion in the Social Security Administration. Our Republican friends say, well, we're not cutting Social Security, but they are proposing a $1.3 billion cut for the Social Security Administration, the people who administer the program. And what does that mean? Right now, there is a significant delay. If you're looking for disability benefits, huge delay. People call in my office all of the time. We can't find somebody to process our claims. And they would propose a $1.3 billion cut, which would delay Social Security benefits to about 500,000 Americans. Madam President, the issue is pretty clear. Top 1% in America earns 23% of all income, more than the bottom 50%. The wealthiest people in this country over the last 20 years have seen a reduction in the tax rates that they pay. And today at 16%, the wealthiest people in this country are paying the lowest tax rates that the rich have paid in many, many decades. So this is not a complicated issue. The issue is, do you move forward to balancing the budget on the backs of people who are in Social Security, on the backs of little children who need Head Start, on the backs of people, seniors in the state of Vermont who depend upon heating assistance? Do you balance the budget on the backs of the weak, the vulnerable, the elderly, or the poor? Or do you say, when we have an increasingly unequal distribution of income, rich are doing very well, do you ask the wealthiest people to start paying their fair share of taxes? The American people are pretty clear on this. They think that it is wrong to balance the budget on those people who are already hurting in a recession. Let us ask the people on top to start paying their fair share so that we can see some shared sacrifice in the midst of this recession. Madam President, with that, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Peter, does anybody in the chair ever say anything about speeches that are given